We have to talk. I just received this email right here about the Nothing Watch 3 Pro, where the people at Nothing claim precision tracking, smart insights, and most importantly, a tooled up heart rate sensor. Now, for those of you that have viewed my Nothing Watch reviews, know that the heart rate tracking has been abysmal. It's really been some of the worst heart rate tracking out there. It really felt like they were not taking it serious. But this email makes it seem as though they're taking the heart rate tracking more seriously. But I'm really curious to find out if this is the case or not. So after seeing this email, I immediately ordered my Nothing Watch 3 Pro. It should be here in 3 or 4 days or so. I'm super excited to test it. I'm also very skeptical whether it will actually be better. But as always, I'll do my objective, systematic and scientific testing. So let's move a few days into the future to future Rob, who just received the watch. It's about 2 to 3 weeks later and I've been extensively testing the CMF Watch 3 Pro. And you'll be surprised at his performance, at least I was. I didn't expect any good results at all from this device, but as you will see, for some exercises at least, it's doing surprisingly well, at least in terms of heart rate tracking. We'll of course also take a look at the sleep stage tracking performance. The GPS testing is somewhat limited though, because I had some problems with data access and data export, so I have to see if I can actually include it in this video, but you'll find out as I'm doing all the analysis. I've done most of the coding required though, which was a lot of work in the end. One problem is that at least for the iPhone app, if I sync the data to Strava, it for some reason doesn't sync the heart rate data, or at least it doesn't appear to be there, and it only syncs exercises that are outdoor. So I did a lot of indoor workouts, and all of those were just not synced to Strava at all. And this is one feature that I've seen in multiple watches and I don't get it. Why also not sync my weightlifting sessions, my indoor cycling sessions, my indoor running sessions? Those are just as important to me, but it might be because it's not syncing the heart rate data. So therefore it basically has nothing to sync if there's no GPS track. That's my suspicion. Maybe you know more. If you have any idea why this is, let us know in the comments below. But let's just get to the data and let's start with the heart rate tracking performance, which I tested during indoor cycling, outdoor cycling, weightlifting and running. And I suspect you will be as surprised as I am with some of the results. But let's take a look. But before getting started, let's make maybe an iced coffee now. It's about 29 degrees Celsius here in my room, which I actually don't know what it means in Fahrenheit, but it's pretty hot. And yes, it's very messy right here. Okay, so I'm at my computer, all the data is right here. So let's take a look. By the way, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. So that will also be the focus of this video. We're gonna do a systematic and sort of scientific analysis of the data I collected with the CMF Watch 3 Pro. So let's take a look. And as always, let's start with a relatively easy exercise for a device to track indoor cycling or spinning. And you can see the results for that right here with the reference device, which is the Polar H10 ECG chest strap here along the horizontal axis, and the CMF Watch 3 Pro along the vertical axis. I use the Polar H10 ECG chest strap as a reference because it's been shown that it's very accurate at heart rate tracking. And it actually uses the electrical activity of the heart instead of that sort of heartbeat signal on the wrist. So it should be very reliable. And if the watch agrees with the reference device, all points should be on or at least close to the blue line. And as you can see, this actually looks really good. Most points are indeed on or at least close to the blue line. There are a few points away from it, but overall, this is a very good result. We can also see that the correlation, which is this R value up here, is 0.99. Now, given that the maximum correlation is 1, 0.99 is quite good. But let's take a look at some of the individual spinning sessions to see if we see any artifacts. Here we have the first spinning session, and this looks generally very good. The reference device is that blue-green line, and the CMF Watch 3 Pro is the red line, and they basically overlap perfectly. You can see that all of my intervals were more or less accurately detected. Only right here my heart rate was lost for a bit, but otherwise it looks really good. This second session mostly looks very good. Only in the beginning, while I was setting things up, it was struggling a bit, but after I actually got started, it looks really good. And finally, this last session is also pretty good. Here also, it lost the signal for a while. The same goes here. So sometimes when there's a quick increase in heart rate, it seems to struggle a little bit. but generally this would be good enough for me. There's also this weird spike right here. But compared to previous performance of CMF watches, this is just very good. But we can actually compare this to the competition out there. By the way, I did forget, you can also support the channel directly by becoming a YouTube member, which also gives you early access to some of my videos, like this one for instance, so some of you are watching this early on. But back to past drop. And that's displayed in this overview right here, where we use that correlation value as the metric to rank devices, where the further to the top right a device is, the better is its agreement with the reference device. And the CMF Watch 3 Pro is marked in red right here. It's a bit difficult to read, so let's zoom in a bit so we can read those labels better. But overall, we can already see that it's among some of the better devices out there. Not the absolute best, but pretty good. But let's take a look. And this is that zoomed in view. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And it's actually already a bit hard to read here. And that's indicating that more and more devices that are getting released are doing quite well, because many of them have a correlation above 0.9 and quite a few also a correlation of 0.95 or higher. 3 years ago, this was much more rare to find, but it's good to see that many devices are getting better, and that also includes the CMF Watch 3 Pro marked in red right here. It's really among some of the best devices out there. It does about as well as the Whoop strap worn on the biceps. Now, the Whoop strap is one of my favorite overall health tracking devices, so it's good that it does as well on the wrist as a Whoop strap does on the biceps, which is generally an easier place to measure heart rate. But it's not doing quite as well as, for instance, the Pixel Watch 3 right here, and also different Apple devices. Also some Huawei devices are doing quite well, but the CMF Watch 3 Pro is surprisingly close, so I'm quite happy with this performance. Any device with a correlation of 0.95 or higher I generally judge as good enough. So if you don't need the absolute best heart rate tracking performance that you get, for instance, from a Pixel Watch 3 or an Apple Watch, I do think the CMF Watch 3 Pro will be good enough for many of you, at least for indoor cycling. But what about a harder exercise to track, such as running? Well, let's take a look at that. I only did a single run because I had a slight irritation on my shin, so I want to give it some rest. But let's take a look at that run. And here we have that interval run that I did. So it was a relatively short run, about 6K I think, with the CMF Watch 3 Pro again marked in red. And here it agrees very poorly with the reference device. In the beginning, it missed the heart rate for a while, then detected a too high heart rate. Then during many of the intervals, it detected a too low heart rate or missed my heart rate completely. Actually, if we look in the app, we can see there's a lot of missing data. So for me, this results in a straight line. But if we look at the data itself, wait, let me show you. So you can see right here, there's a lot of missing data. So in my graph, that just becomes basically a straight line. But for some reason, the CMF Watch 3 Pro wasn't able to detect my heart rate, or at least not accurately during running. Now, this could have something to do with the extreme bumpiness during a run, which can induce similar periodic signals as your heart rate, which gets some watches confused. And at least on me for the single run, so a very limited data set, this does appear to be the case for the CMF Watch 3 Pro. But what about you guys? Do any of you have this device and did you use it on a run? If you found any problems with it, let me know in the comments below. But this really doesn't look very good, and there are better devices out there. Let me show you. So this is a similar overview to before, but now for running. Now this only looks at the correlation value, so it doesn't take into account those missing values, which is in a way a similarly big problem as wrong measurements. So it's actually even worse than this graph seems to imply. There's a correlation of about 0.58 or so. But based on this admittedly limited test, I wouldn't say that the CMF Watch 3 Pro is good enough for tracking your heart rate during running. And there are quite a few better devices out there. Let me show you. These are the best devices that I've ever tested. And among some of the top performers, we have, for instance, the Amazfit Helio strap worn on the biceps. Even the Mi Band 10 did quite well. Also, the Whoop strap on the biceps did really well. By the way, if you do end up wanting to get this CMF Watch 3 Pro, maybe a Whoop strap, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, I have different affiliate links in the description below. They do not cost you any extra, and many give you the best discount possible. And if you buy anything on Amazon by clicking my link first, you'll give me a small commission on that sale without it costing you any extra, and that's a great way to support the channel. But based on this data, if running is your sport, I wouldn't recommend the CMF Watch 3 Pro. I definitely think that, for instance, the Amazfit Helio strap is a better option when worn on the biceps at least, but even a watch from Amazfit like the T-Rex X3 for instance does quite well. And also some Garmin devices like the Forerunner 570 or 970 are quite good for running. These are actually some of my favorite devices for running specifically because they have very good GPS, and that's very important to me during running and also cycling. Talking about cycling, let's take a look at some of that data now. But before mentioning that, I'm a cyclist for the last 15 years or so, an amateur, but I still really enjoy it. But I've been getting more and more into running, and for that I use the Runner app. I really don't know how to make running plans to prepare myself for a future half marathon, and the Runner app has been amazing for making those running plans for me, personalized to me, and also giving me live coaching during my runs. And if you want the best deal possible for the Runner app and support the channel at the same time, there's an affiliate link up here and down here, so you'll help the channel and help yourself by getting the best running plans and coaching out there. Now, enough about running, let's take a look at the results for cycling outside, which are surprisingly better again, but I'll show you. And here we have that overview for cycling outside, and this again looks surprisingly good as I mentioned. Most points are on or close to the blue line, only a few are further away from it, and the correlation is actually quite high at 0.98, so I'm really happy with this result. I am curious to look at the individual rides now to see if there's any missing data, because that was a problem with running and that wouldn't show up in this kind of overview. So let's take a look. Here we have the first bike ride with again the reference device in blue-green and the CMF Watch 3 Pro in red. And the overlap is pretty good. Some of the details are missed, like here this dip or also this dip, but definitely good enough, nothing to complain about. Also right here, the overall agreement is quite good. So we do see some missing data. So for instance, right here for a while, it didn't detect my heart rate. And also here, it stopped detecting my heart rate for a while. And actually also right here. So in this last segment, there's a lot of missing data. It's not a major problem, but I would be a bit annoyed by this. Then again, this last session again looks really good. So overall, pretty good result. When it does detect your heart rate, it is very accurate for cycling outside, at least on me. However, there is some missing data there. But again, based on these results, I would be able to recommend it for cycling outside. And we can actually compare this correlation to the competition. And we see that in this overview right here, where again, we're just looking at the correlation, so missing data is not taken into account. But here it's really among some of the top performers, so it's marked in red right here, and it's really doing about as well as the Pixel Watch 3 for instance, and slightly worse than some Apple Watches. But we can actually zoom in a bit so we can read those labels better, and you can really see it's among some of the better performers. But as I said, Apple Watches are doing better, also the Amazfit Helio strap on the biceps, and it's doing about as well, I would say, as different Pixel watches. So for cycling outside, not taking into account the missing data, it's doing quite well. And this really had me surprised. I don't understand why on my run it struggled so much, and I did have it attached to my wrist quite well, I think. I usually check these kind of things. Maybe next week or so, when my shin feels a little bit better, I'll be able to do another run. But for now, this is the data I've had, where for cycling outside it did quite well, for cycling inside it did quite well, running not so well. Well, let's take a look at the last exercise at the gym, weightlifting. And in this overview for weightlifting, we see what we see for many watches. And that is that in the higher heart rate range right here, there's a too low heart rate being detected by the watch, so the CMF Watch 3 Pro in this case, where most points are below the blue line. And the correlation is also not that high at 0.87. This most likely indicates that when there's a peak in my heart rate and there's so much tension on my arm because I'm lifting those weights, the CMF Watch 3 Pro wasn't able to detect my heart rate accurately. But let's take a look at the individual sessions. And here we have the first example, where indeed each time I did a set of exercises, my heart rate increased according to the reference, and this wasn't detected by the CMF Watch 3 Pro. The same goes for this second session. Even my heart rate was missed quite often, so it just stopped detecting my heart rate. And we see mostly the same thing for this last session, but here I did a lot of leg exercises as well, and even some of those were missed. So overall for weightlifting, it's not recommended. But in addition to heart rate tracking, the CMF Watch 3 Pro can also track your sleep stages. So let's now take a look at those results. We'll compare the sleep stages as tracked by the CMF Watch 3 Pro to the Z-Max EEG headband, which is a scientific EEG device that measures brain waves specifically designed for sleep tracking. This is also imperfect, especially when it comes to detecting awake time, but the sleep stages deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep are detected reliable enough to do a comparison of those to the CMF Watch 3 Pro to see how well it did. So let's take a look at those results. And here we have that overview for sleep stage tracking, with the sleep stages as tracked by the reference device on top and the sleep stages as measured by the CMF Watch 3 Pro on the left. And if they would perfectly agree, these values in yellow right here should be 100%. So basically each column here is normalized to 100%. Now, first of all, we see that about 79% of what was deep sleep according to the reference device was also detected as deep sleep by the CMF Watch 3 Pro, so that's pretty good. And most confusion in this case was with light sleep. Now, light sleep agreement is not quite as good at about 67%, so about 2/3 of what was light sleep according to the reference device was also light sleep according to the watch. However, quite a bit of it was instead predicted as being deep sleep. And since you have more light sleep in the night, there's quite a bit of extra deep sleep detected by the CMF Watch 3 Pro. And REM sleep agreement is the worst at less than 50%, so 48%. Now we see that actually for many devices that REM sleep is by far the hardest exercise for a device to track. So 48% is not surprising, but I was hoping for a bit better. For instance, devices like the Apple Watch, the H Sleep Pod, and even the Pixel Watch do a lot better than this, or at least a bit better. But we can actually take a look at that by putting these results in the perspective of many other devices I've tested before. And here we have that overview, where again, the more to the top right the device is, the better is its agreement with the reference device. Now, all the devices that were tested against the Z-Max EEG headband are marked in green, and you can find the CMF Watch 3 Pro right here. So the overall agreement is about 64%, and the worst sleep stage, so REM sleep, I think was about 47, 48%. So the horizontal axis gives you the overall agreement, and the vertical axis is the worst agreeing out of the 3 sleep stages. And as you can see, the CMF Watch 3 Pro is somewhere in the middle of all devices, I would say. It's quite close to the performance of different Garmin devices, for instance, right here. So it's okay-ish, but definitely not good. I would say it's in the third tier of devices. So generally, I say there are 2 top tiers. The first highest tier are all the devices up here, which is basically 4 different brands. That's the Oura Ring, the H Sleep Pod, the Nuku or Sleep 2 app, and finally the Apple Watch. How could I forget that one? So those are the 4 top brands. And in the second tier of devices, we have, for instance, the Whoop strap and different Google or Pixel devices. So all Google and Pixel devices have the same sleep stage tracking algorithm, and they're all somewhere here in this second tier. So if sleep stage tracking is really important to you, I would get a top tier device like an Apple Watch, but not everybody wants to use an Apple device. So an alternative is actually the H Sleep Pod, which is super expensive, but it's the best sleep improvement device that I have. So in addition to tracking without wearing anything on your body, the H Sleep Pod is actually a thing that goes around your mattress and actively cools and heats each side of the bed. So for both you and your potential partner, which I don't have at the moment, you can set an independent temperature. And for me, this is really the only reason I get good sleep in summer, because we have no aircon right here in this building. And I can just set my H Sleep Pod to the temperature that I want, and I sleep like a baby. But it's also really expensive. If you also have trouble sleeping on those hot summer days or those cold winter nights, you can check my affiliate link up here or down here for the best deal possible on the H Sleep Pod. And you're gonna need it because it's really expensive. Now, as I said, similar to the H Sleep Pod, the Apple Watch is also a pretty good sleep stage tracker, but you need an Apple device. The Oura Ring is also a good alternative, and then there's a Sleep 2 or Nuku app. So it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're also looking to potentially improve your sleep quality, I can really recommend the H Sleep Pod, but it's really expensive. So really think about it before you get it. And if you cannot afford it, don't get it on credit. Just only buy devices that you can afford outright. So this is the overview for the sleep tracking, where the CMF Watch 3 Pro is somewhere in the middle. It's not terrible, and it does a lot better than my previous testing. So where do we have my previous test? It's right here. So in my previous testing, it was right here. I think this was also based on relatively few nights, and the overview today where this result comes from is based on 6 nights. I believe previously I used even fewer nights, so maybe it actually performs similar to my previous testing. It's hard to say at the moment. And of course, these are the results on me. They might vary to some degree from person to person. So I do think my ranking of devices generally agrees with scientific literature. So I previously made a video where I took all the literature I could find on sleep stage tracking, combined it into a single graph, and it more or less looked like this. There were just fewer devices out there, since I think I've done the most sleep stage testing out of anyone. But that's the sleep stage tracking. To close off, I want to take a quick look at the GPS, but I was only able to partially test this. Let me show you. Now, because I was traveling a lot this month, I couldn't do my standard GPS tracking with the CMF Watch 3 Pro. But I do want to show you one thing I noticed. Now we're only going to look at a single ride, and I started that on this corner right here. So the signal was acquired quickly, so that's good. But one thing I noticed is that the frequency at which a GPS signal was recorded is rather low. You can already see quite strong corners right here. Also right here, from here to here, might have been 3 seconds or so. So it only recorded a signal right here and right here. And if we go along the route, we can see that even though it's relatively okay following the road, the frequency of the signal being recorded is quite low. So also right here, we can see that the position was acquired right here and also right here. And there's a straight line in between. You can see the same thing basically along the entire route, that the frequency of recording is quite low, and I at least couldn't find a setting to improve this. If you know how to do this, let us know in the comments below. But overall, even though the signal quality might be okay, I find it hard to say anything. And for me, the frequency of recording is just a bit too low. You can see that every corner is basically cut off like this. And you can see that for the entire route. And this should also lead to relatively inaccurate distance calculations, unless they somehow account for this with some kind of software magic. But yeah, this is what I found with the standard settings. If you have any experience with this, let us know in the comments below. But let's now get to my final conclusions on this new CMF Watch 3 Pro, which did surprisingly well in my testing, at least compared to the previous generations. Okay, that was a decent amount of data on the CMF Watch 3 Pro. And overall, like I said, I was pleasantly surprised. However, is it good enough for you to get? Well, that depends a bit on what you're looking for and what your budget is. I think I bought it for about €100, so let's say $100, which is not that expensive, but there are other watches in this category. You can get, for instance, different Huawei devices, like a Huawei Watch Fit 3, for instance, which you could probably get a good deal on. That also has great heart rate tracking and pretty good GPS tracking. Another option might be a Mi Band 10, which did quite well in my testing, though I don't think it has built-in GPS. Subjectively, I also have to say that I do like the design of the CMF Watch 3 Pro. It looks quite good. In my opinion, it doesn't look cheap, even though it's quite plasticky overall. The main downsides for me is that the heart rate tracking during my run was pretty bad, and that the GPS tracking might give you a low estimate of your total distance traveled if it really cuts all those corners. And of course, the sleep stage tracking isn't amazing, but that's true for most devices out there. There's only about 6 brands that do good enough in my opinion. So should you get the CMF Watch 3 Pro? Well, if you really like the design and you're mostly a cyclist, then yes, the heart rate tracking is pretty decent. I don't know why I didn't upload to Strava. I really think this is inherent to the app and not to the account that I have. But yeah, that's one thing I noticed. However, if you're into running, I would also check out some other reviews to see if other people have the same problem I have with it. And if you really care about your sleep stages being very accurate, then I can also not recommend it. So mostly if you're just really into this kind of design philosophy of nothing or CMF, then you could get it. If you just want to track your heart rate during indoor or outdoor cycling and probably during different activities at the gym that do not involve lifting weights. However, like I said, even though it's a lot better, it still has its quirks. So the running results, the GPS tracking results, and the sleep stages. So yeah, that's where we are. It's not easy to recommend to everybody, but I can recommend it to some of you. Now, if you want to support the channel, one amazing way of doing that is by becoming a YouTube member, which gives you early access to videos like this. So some of you are watching this early on. It's basically Patreon on YouTube that allows you to support the channel financially. And in addition, you get early access to the videos. Also, if before making any Amazon purchase, you click my link down here or up here, you support the channel by giving me a small commission and it doesn't cost you any extra. Or if you do decide to get the H-Sleep Pod, the Whoop strap, an Oura Ring, another device, and you use my affiliate links down here, you get a discount and you're also supporting the channel. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the CMF Watch 3 Pro, check out this video on the Whoop strap or this video on the best sleep stage trackers.